Hey guys, good morning. Happy Sunday. So today I'm doing a webinar on relationships, and this is a very interesting topic. And I'm just going to tell you what I've learned throughout the years since I started coaching, since I started this work, what I've learned about relationships. And I have to say that knowing this has actually made a really big difference in my relationships and in the way that I relate to others. And when I talk about relationships in this webinar, I mean your parents, your friends, your romantic partner, basically just any type of relationship. What I'm going to say applies to all the relationships, actually. So, so the theme for this webinar is relationship dynamics and the different types of relationships. And there's actually four different types of relationships. And as usual, this is a premise. So the premise that I'm using is that there are four types of relationships. And a premise is basically an idea or a concept, and that when you apply it gives you a particular result. So you don't have to agree with the premise, but the premise is just there because when it is applied, it gives you a result. So that's that. So there's four types of relationships, and there's three that are dysfunctional. And by dysfunctional, I mean they're just not working. They don't work. They may work in the short term, but they don't work in the long term. And the first dysfunctional relationship type is the codependent relationship. And I'm going to show you a codependent relationship. I'm going to draw a little drawing here for you. A codependent relationship can be illustrated as such. So two circles, each person is one circle. And a codependent relationship is a relationship where each person is extremely codependent. So is dependent from the other. Yeah. So for example, actually I'll give you examples later, but in a codependent relationship, you have these two intertwined circles. And what it means in a relationship is very often these people who are in such type of relationship are not making their own decisions without checking with the other person. So I used to work in sales a lot when I was younger, and when a guy would come or when a woman would come to the store and be like, oh, I really like this dress. I'm just gonna bring my husband in to see if he likes it, and that's a codependent relationship. It's like you're not making decisions before checking in with the other person or asking for the other person's opinion. It's very much a relationship where and maybe some of you will resonate with this, where you can't love the other if the other doesn't love you. That's very much codependent. So I can't love you if you don't love me. So I can't depend on you if you don't depend on me. And that is something I very much experienced when one day I had a partner who said, I'm not sure if I love you that way anymore. And then for me, that was like the end of the relationship. So it was like, oh, well, if you don't love me, then I can't love you. I didn't know that at that time, but now I know what happens. So love is love. Yeah, there shouldn't be any conditions to loving someone. You just love them. It's not that, oh, first you love me, then I love you. So yeah, that's very much codependent. And in this relationship, there's this constant need for getting validation from the other person. And so in the end, when you're in a codependent relationship, you cannot be your own entity. You cannot be your own person. It's like the codependent relationship is very much like, oh, this person completes me. Well, actually, no, you are complete. You know, you are 100%. It's not that you are 50% and then if you add this person, then you become 100%. It doesn't work like that. You are already 100%. So in that relationship, it's very much like when people say I found my other half, there is no such thing as other half because you already are one entity. You're not half of an entity. You are one person. You're not half of a person, and so you actually don't need anyone to complete you. But there's very much in the codependent relationship, there's very much this idea that the other person is going to complete you and the other person is going to make you happy. So that's a codependent relationship. It feels very stuck, but I'll give you more details of how it feels later on. The second dysfunctional relationship dynamic is the dominant submissive. So I'll give you another little drawing. The dominant submissive relationship can be illustrated as such. So this would be the dominant. The dominant is the outer circle and the submissive is the inner circle. And as you can see, the dominant person is basically surrounding the submissive person. Yeah, this is the submissive person. So in that relationship dynamic, you could actually be one or the other. So you could be the submissive, but you could be the dominant. So the dominant submissive relationship can go vice versa. Yeah. So there's a sensation that you can't, for the submissive person, there's a sensation that they can't breathe in that relationship, that they feel like they've been put in a cage, or that they're constantly being watched and controlled by the dominant. There's a real sense of fear in relation to the other person, in relation to the dominant, of course. And there's a real sense of powerlessness as well. And the submissive behavior comes from the fact that the person in the submissive part, the submissive role, sees the dominant person as an authority, and so completely sort of like gives up all their own power because they perceive that person has more power, more authority, and so they just completely submit to that. Yeah. And then the dominant then usually manifests in a lot of controlling mechanisms, controlling strategies. Usually the dominant person has a lot of trust issues, but also a lot of powerlessness issues. So because they feel powerless deep inside, their strategy then to compensate for that is to actually become very dominant and very controlling, and because that's how they feel like they gain power by doing that. There's a lot of manipulation as well going on, which is part of control. And in this dominant submissive relationship dynamic, this is usually what you see as abusive, violent relationships. I do want to add something about this dynamic, which is quite interesting, is that I don't want to I'm not saying that that you're in an abusive or violent relationship because it's your fault or whatever, but hear me out on this point, which I think is absolutely interesting. When I first heard it, I was just like, wow. So by being the submissive person, you actually bring out a dominant type behavior in someone else. And by being a dominant person, you bring out the submissive, the powerlessness, and the fear of somebody else. And have you ever met someone? There was this girl in school when I was quite young, in high school. There was this girl who she was just so mellow, and she was so timid and shy and slow, and just so not confident with herself, and she was just so submissive. Like, her misdemeanor was like very, very passive and submissive. And I've never considered myself to be a dominant person, but however, when I spent some time with this girl, she was so submissive that she actually brought out the dominant side in me. And then there was a point where I just felt like slapping her and waking her up, and just shaking her, like, just wake up, do something, say something, make a decision, I don't know. So it's very interesting how some people can have a very submissive attitude and then end up in abusive relationships, and to some extent they are creating that. Because if you look at nature, it's the law of the fittest. So if you look at how things work in the jungle, that's just how things work in the jungle. The leader of the pack is gonna be the dominant one, and then the followers are gonna be the submissive one. So if why does that happen? Because there's a sensing of people's energy and just attitudes and dynamics in general. So when you come across someone who's naturally submissive, then you're automatically, and I'm not talking about everyone, but I know that if I come across someone who's quite submissive, I've learned that then my dominance sort of like kicks in, and I tend to be perhaps a bit more rough with that person, or I can talk to them quite rudely and actually not understanding why I'm behaving like this with this person, because I'm not rude in general, I'm not rough or anything like that, and why am I talking to this person? Why am I being such a bitch to this person? And understanding that this is not how I am usually, so why am I behaving like this with this person in particular? That's because they have a submissive behavior, which brings out my dominance. And so now that I know that, I don't have to be a bitch anymore. But equally, when I meet someone who's quite dominant, who I perceive as more of an authority than I am, then I immediately submit. But I understand now that even I could potentially be bringing out somebody's dominating behavior, when actually perhaps that's not who they are in general, but because I'm just automatically submitting to them, then it brings out this sort of like cockiness about them. So this dynamic is a very interesting dynamic, because obviously, in the work that I do, I believe that we create 99% of the shit that happens to us. So, but obviously, there is interaction with others. So, but in this particular type of relationship, it's very interesting to see how, when you're in a violent, abusive relationship, it's very hard to say, and it's very hard for people to understand that actually both the dominant and the submissive one are actually responsible for the violence and the abusiveness in that relationship. And it's difficult to make people understand, especially because they're being submissive, but they have no idea about that they're not conscious of it. Yeah. And equally for the dominant one, a lot of people are like, I don't want to behave like this. She makes me behave like this. Yeah, that's something that I've heard a lot. I'm not a bitch. She makes me become a bitch. So, and the interesting thing is that I have seen myself in both the spectrums. Like I've seen myself as a submissive, and I've also seen myself as a dominant person. So yeah, this is quite an interesting dynamic. The third relationship dynamic is aloof. So the aloofness is when, actually, I'm going to do another little drawing for you guys. Aloofness is this third drawing. So you see how this circle is not even touching that circle. There's a distance between them. Yeah, so this is one person, and this would be another person, and this is aloof. This is the aloof dynamic. Why aloof? Because they're literally ignoring each other. So what happens in the aloof relationship dynamic? There's a real fear of losing yourself in a relationship, and so the strategy that comes with that is being very, very protective about your space and about the time that you spend with that person, about also how much emotion you communicate to that person. There's a real there is very little vulnerability, there's very little expression in this type of relationship, simply because the person who is aloof is fearful that the person who's aloof is scared that the other person will use their vulnerability against them. So for example, if I tell someone, this is how I feel, blah blah blah, this, if I share, if I'm vulnerable with someone, if I am aloof, I'm not going to do that, because I'm going to be scared that me sharing such information that will then contribute to that person using that information against me, basically. So this is a highly mistrusting type of relationship. Usually there's a lot of long periods of no communication in a relationship, especially in a romantic one. That's quite a not very nice relationship to be in, because it feels like the other person doesn't care about you. So it feels like the aloof person doesn't care about you because they're not spending time with you, they're not sharing their feelings with you. They can actually very much be in love with you, but because they are aloof, because they have this trust issue going on, they will keep their distance. That's just their strategy to keep themselves sort of like in control as well of how much you know about them, how much influence, how much impact you're going to have in their life. So yeah, this is very much people who think that yeah, by spending time with the other person, they're gonna become less themselves, or they're gonna have less freedom to be who they want to be. So there's a real sense of wanting wanting freedom, wanting no commitment. Yeah, that type of relationship. There's not much to say about this relationship because really nothing much happens, because actually there is limited amount of interaction in that type of relationships. So yeah, but nevertheless, it's quite an interesting one. And by the way, you know, you can totally resonate with all of these different relationship types. So I know that I resonate with codependent, I resonate with dominant submissive, I also resonate with aloof. Like, I have experienced all these types of relationships in my life, and with different partners as well. I've had different types of relationships, and in my friendships as well, I can see what type of relationship I'm most likely having with such and such person, for example. So this was the three dysfunctional relationship dynamics. And then there's a functional, thank God, relationship dynamic, and it can be depicted by this little drawing. Excuse me for my shit drawing, but basically this is a this is a functional relationship where you see you have two circles and they just touch each other. They're not crossing each other, they're not one inside of each other, or they're not separate, they're just touching each other. So I'm let's say I'm the circle and somebody else is another circle. My circle is touching somebody else's circle. This is a functional relationship where we are connected, but we are not trespassing, or we are not ignoring each other. Yeah. So the cool thing with the functional relationship is that it's very much a relationship where you are yourself, and the other person is being him or herself, and you guys meet to share, to connect, to love each other, but there's no control there, there's no manipulation. Each person is their own authority. Each person is sovereign. I really like this word, sovereign. I'm the queen of my own circle. This is my circle, and and in that relationship, as much as I know this is my circle, and I want you, or the other person, to respect my circle, I also respect the other person's circle. So it's very much like it's a grown-up relationship. It's a very much mature relationship. It's a loving relationship where I'm not projecting my emotional traumas and needs. I'm not projecting my neediness onto somebody else. I'm not waiting for them to make a decision. I'm not waiting for them to give me permission for me to make a decision. I can very much love someone even though this person is not perhaps not loving me at the same level that I'm loving them, because I'm just loving them. I'm not expecting anything from that person. But it's a beautiful relationship dynamic in the sense that we connect, you know, at that point where two circles touch, we share with each other what we are about, and we interact with each other in a very powerful way, and we actually empower each other. Whereas, you know, me dumping my emotional neediness on someone, or constantly seeking validation from someone, or me submitting to someone just because they seem to be a higher authority in their own field or whatever. So it's very much about, you know, you have a circle. Let's say you have this circle around you, and this circle represents who you are about. And it's this, being in a functional relationship is very much about owning your circle and really understanding, you know, when people come and trespass your circle, to be gentle and to just push them outside of your circle. So yeah, this is it doesn't happen overnight, you know. It requires constant work and effort, and it requires a lot of communication as well. And you know what, the dysfunctional relationships is something that we do unconsciously, and that we all have, because we all have a dysfunctional relationship in relation to our parents, because that was these were the first relationships that we created. And I remember that when I had to look at, you know, what type of relationship I had with my parents, I thought, oh, I have massive daddy issues, and you know, in my relationship with my dad, it's very much me being the submissive, him being the dominant. And then with my mom, I was just like, I have nothing to say about my mom. She was amazing. She's always been amazing. I have no problems with my mom. It's not because you don't have any problems in a relationship that there is no underlying dysfunctional dynamic going on. And actually, I realized that much later, that with my mom, there was a very aloof relationship. And so now I've developed this aloofness towards women, because my mom was the first feminine relationship I had, and my dad was obviously the first masculine relationship I had. So and even if, you know, you never got to meet your dad in real life, you know, you actually have a dysfunctional relationship based on your dad, based on the first masculine relationship that you had. And if the first masculine entity in your life was not there, yeah, you actually established some kind of relationship based on the fact that that masculine entity wasn't there. So I can go on and on and on and on and on. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, so I can, if there's anything that you feel like deserves more explanation, then please, by all means, just email me or write a comment, and I will do my best to explain. So yeah, basically, I'm gonna ask you to do a small little exercise right now, where I'm gonna ask you to look at the different types of dynamics. So the codependent, the dominant submissive, and the aloof dynamic, and even the functional dynamic. And I'm gonna ask you to write down, who do you immediately think of when you look at these different types of relationships. You know, so for the codependent one, I'm sure that as I was explaining what the codependent relationship looks like, immediately someone came up to you in your head, or some kind of relationship you have or you had with someone came up for you. For me, I know that a lot of my romantic relationships are very much codependent, because I actually, yeah. So a lot of my relationships have been codependent. Like I can say, for example, you know, my last romantic relationship was very much codependent, where there was a point where I felt like I I felt like I was dragging someone everywhere I was going, and I felt like I wasn't fully being myself. I felt like I was stopping myself from being who I really wanted to be because of the other person. So sort of like waiting for the other constantly, for you to make a decision, or make a move. Yeah. I know that this is me and my dad. And I'm the one in the center, basically. My dad is a very dominant individual. He's not bad or anything, by the way, this is not bad or wrong or good or whatever. It just is what it is. When I say it's dysfunctional, it's just that it's not conducive to you living your greatest life, and it's not conducive to having really powerful relationships and mature relationships, or even empowering relationships. Yeah, this is really not empowering, because it feels like you're dragging someone along the whole time. You're always stopping yourself for the other. This is really not empowering either. This is very much me and my dad. But because this is my relationship with my dad, I know that this is also a dynamic that I will tend to project on my other romantic relationships. So let's say that my partner is a little bit more on the dominant side, then I will automatically fall into this submissiveness, and this will lead to catastrophic relationships. And trust me, I have experienced enough of these where I feel like I'm just being completely under the under the control of this other person. I feel like I'm in a cage, basically. I can't forget about making my own decisions. For just there's a fear inside here. There's a massive fear of the other, of the other individual, and of what they can do to us. And it doesn't need to be a physically abusive relationship. You see, it doesn't. I was never like traumatically. My dad never, like, of course my dad slapped me once in a while when I did something, but I was never raped or abused violently on a physical level or on a mental level. Like, this is just because my dad has a dominant personality. When I was little, I immediately fell into that, and that's just based on my personality as well, like my unconscious egoic way of functioning. Yeah, this is how I survived, because I remember I used to be very hello that was a quick one. So yeah, I used to be very scared of the other. And this one was very much for me and my mom, because my mom was very independent, and so she brought me up to be very independent as well. So even though we love each other, there's always been this sort of like distance, like, let me do my thing and you do your thing. And which was cool, because I always got to do whatever I wanted. But there was this, for me, let's say this is me, there was always this sort of like need of like, oh, but I want more of your attention, I want more of your love. And my mom being like very independent, she'd always like be like, no, you do your own thing. So, and now I see this with my friends. This is the kind of relationship I have with my girlfriends, where there can be a long time without me even communicating with them, and that's just my dynamic, and I have to make an effort, and I remember that, and I have to make an effort to sort of reach out. And then functional, well, I'm kind of like in and out all the time of this one right now in my romantic relationship, but I'm always making an effort to reach this. So anyways, your exercise is basically for each dynamic, just write down, who are you thinking of? Who do you fall into, you know, like in which dynamic do you fall into? And then in the end, you can pause this now. But then in the end, what I want you to do is that I'd like you to close your eyes and imagine that you are this. Imagine that you are this circle, and imagine that, you know, you're, you know, you can try, this is an imaginative exercise, so you can try this with anyone. So imagine that you're a circle, and imagine that your partner is another circle, or your best friend is another circle, or your dad or your mom. You choose whoever you want, and imagine that you're in a functional relationship where, you know, your circle touches your other your partner's circle, and imagine how that feels. Imagine that you're in the circle and there's a real connection here, but you are sovereign here. You're the king or the queen of your own palace, and that other person is also the king or the queen of their own palace, and you just come together to share and to connect, to empower each other, but you're very much sovereign, and you're making your own decisions, you're making your own choices, and you're living your own life, and you're just being fully expressed. Yeah. So do this little exercise where you're just imagining that you're this circle and you're having a functional relationship with whomsoever it is, even if right now you may be in this codependent or dominant, submissive, or aloof relationship. Imagine what it feels like to be in this relationship. Yeah. And so you can pause the webinar now so that you can do the exercise at your own pace. But now so how do we get from a dysfunctional relationship to a functional relationship? And you know, the best thing that I'm coming up with for today for you is awareness. If you don't know which type of relationship you are most likely to fall into, then, you know, if you're not conscious of this, then, you know, it's going to be very difficult for you to get out of it. And it's very easy to blame the other person for the dysfunctional for the dysfunctional relationship that you have, but you have an equal part of responsibility in that relationship. So yeah, me knowing myself, you know, as I said, in my romantic relationship, I tend to fall into this just because it's my default type of dynamic with the male. And so I'm very aware of this, and the fact that I'm very aware of this makes me go differently about it, and just like, oh, okay, I'm being submissive right now, or I'm feeling powerless, or I'm feeling scared of the other. Why am I feeling scared of the other? There's no reason for me to be scared of the other person. So actually, let me just move into this. And actually, I do this exercise where I imagine, you know, when I feel like I'm in this dynamic, I do this exercise, and I imagine that I'm a circle and my partner is another circle, and we're just touching each other, and we're not in each other's face, or we're not, you know, projecting our own neediness or anything like that. So yeah, knowing myself has definitely been a huge advantage for me in my relationships. Or, you know, if someone is being dominant and I know I have a tendency to just immediately submit, now I most likely don't fall into the submissiveness. I actually, I've done a lot of work on myself, but because I know this, now I tend to be like, oh, okay, well, I don't want that. That's not what I want. And actually, I'm a powerful human being, so let me express myself in a powerful way. And even though this person might seem dominant or whatever, they have their own shit going on. So yeah, and even with my mom, this aloofness, which really doesn't mean that we don't love each other. It's just that the dynamic is just such that perhaps, you know, they can be like, I don't know, a whole month or maybe 2 months without us talking to each other. And she's not going to call. So, because that's just how she is. And it doesn't mean that she doesn't love me or anything. I had to really get my head around this. But I do the same with some of my friends. I never call them. I never text them. I think of them, but I'm just aloof. I'm doing my thing, and you should go and do your thing. So now I'm aware of that, and I know it can create, you know, frustration on the other side. So, you know, I had friends telling me, oh, you never call me, you never text me, like, and I get it, and I'm just like, sorry, that's just how I am. It doesn't mean anything about you. So yeah, just me being conscious of that and making a little to go towards people, that has been quite useful as well in creating better relationship in general. So that's it. That's the webinar for today. I hope you enjoyed it. There's a lot more to say about this topic, but to be honest, I think that for now it's pretty good. And I know that the first time I got to learn about these different types of relationships, I was just observing everyone in my life and getting to understand the dynamics I was having with everyone, but also observing, you know, my dad and his wife, and what type of dynamic they had with each other, or my mom and her husband, what type of dynamic they were having with each other, and just understanding like why certain things don't work, and just being very observant about these things. So yeah, cool. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please comment or send me an email. I'll be happy to reply. And I'll see you next month. Bye bye.